Hello and welcome back to Raw Sports Quorum Stream. I am your host, and yeah, we are back for term 2, 2021, which is weird to say out loud. Yeah, we're going to be discussing one of the few sports that seems to be powering through this pandemic, or spluttering through this pandemic, however you view it, is football. And so we're going to be discussing a lot of the latest just the trends that have been going on throughout the season. We'll preview some of the fixtures coming up. We'll start with the big one this weekend in just a bit. And yeah, just take stock and just kind of look ahead and have a look back at some of the Christmas results and kind of look ahead and see what, how these teams are tracking heading into the second half of the season. So, yeah, so quick, obviously, video description has our social media links, so feel free to follow all of them. And yeah, Enoch, you could say that. You could say football's been doing that. I've lost my train of thought now. What was I going to say? Yes. Oh, we had Raw Sport Weekly on a few days ago, so you can catch that on this channel. It was myself, Joe Spagnoli, Cam Hall, Cam who's on as well today. We were discussing the cricket, which has been going pretty well for England, I would say. And also the revamped F1 calendar and just some, tidbits of F1 news as well. So you check that show out as well. So without further ado, I'm going to bring on my panel. And yeah, I've already said he's on, so I'll bring him on. Cam Hall, who must be, this is a football show, Cam, but you, again, as I said, you must be delighted with how the cricket's gone and how we predicted it'd be close, but it's gone very, very well.
It's gone a lot better than I thought it was going to. I thought England have a typical problem against spin when they go to Sri Lanka and they go to India into the subcontinent. But that first morning, I think it was Kumar Sangakkara, the Sky Sports pal, this fantastic video of Kumar Sangakkara, Nasser Hussain, and Michael Atherton just talking about just that 135 and 46 overs that Sri Lanka got on the first morning of a test match. The way that Sri Lanka batted was I think Nasser Hussain summed it up perfectly. It was the most farcical 46 overs. There were about 8 of the 10 wickets were to attacking shots that were just pointless. Some of them, I can't remember who it was exactly, but one of the batsmen in the middle order literally was just playing like it was a one-day T20 game. And, fundamentally, Sri Lanka lost it on the first morning, and Joe Root absolutely stole it from them. He needed those runs. I said that, captain needs to lead from the front. It's a big series for him. And he has performed absolutely fantastic and hit one of his best scores of his test match career, perhaps one of his best innings of his test match career.
Yeah, and will be very interesting to see. Obviously, we expect them to go on to win this match at least. Will be interesting to see how they do on the series overall. But again, we'll discuss this on Raw Sport Weekly for sure. Obviously, my next guest on as well, Raw Sport deputy and someone who will be very, very happy with how the Premier League table looks at the moment. It's Ben Parkinson. Ben, how are you? And you're on. Right, I'm not sure. Can you hear me? Right, I'm gonna remove Ben just a moment there.
It wouldn't
we'll bring on
without the tech.
Yeah, this is typical. Some things don't change, even as well as we hope.
I appear to be running this now. Okay. Josh will be back very shortly. If this were, as I said, it's not a Raw 12:51 AM sports stream, or indeed any Raw 12:51 AM stream, whether it's Insight, whether it's on my show, The Alternative View, whether it's these streams. Technology G is one of our finest standout points here, definitely.
This has gone as great as planned. I'm just going to bring on my next two guests, Luke James, who editor of the Ball Sport, of the sports section of the Ball, got the best in terms of FPL wise, best game week of all teams, or supports the team as the best game week with West Ham. Luke, how are you?
I'm good. I'm delighted to have a good FPL week finally. I normally do kind of like the manager.
Am I working?
Oh. Anyway, I normally do a manager of the week thing, but because I won, I didn't put the post out anyway.
I feel you should have celebrated your own glories. You know, take pride in yourself almost.
You have that situation, but at the same time, you're like, well, everyone knows that I run the sport account, so it's like, potatoes. But no, very good indeed. I think the important thing to remember as well is that the season, kind of the Premier League season, is really exciting at the moment, especially with what we've got this weekend, the Northwest Derby between Liverpool and Manchester United. So a world of opportunities awaits. And I think on kind of an FPL note, this week's really interesting because of the number of double game weeks. And I mean, I had a number of players who kind of play for Aston Villa knocked out because of coronavirus and all that kind of stuff. So you have to readapt, move. And now I've kind of got a completely different team to the one I started with. But yeah, I think it's interesting indeed. An interesting time to be on FPL.
I'm not going to lie, I haven't actually touched my team since September. I've just completely, because everything's just been going with the schedule at the moment, I've almost just forgotten to keep doing the team. So I still think I've got Jota in my team, even though he's been like injured now for over a month. So something has clearly gone wrong there. Definitely.
What I would say as well, so my girlfriend knows absolutely nothing about football and isn't interested in football whatsoever. But because I've always kind of banged on about FPL and all this stuff, and she like sees what I'm doing, she's joined in since last season. And a couple of times she's forgot to do her team. And the week just gone, I think she had 8 players, including her substitutes, who just didn't play at all, either because of coronavirus or no fixture or whatever. And she still got 25 points because she ended up captaining Phil Foden, who was a vice captain, but the captain didn't play, and he got 11. And Lloris, I think, got 5 or something like that. I was like, 25 points from 2 players is quite impressive.
No, definitely.
But no, yeah, good week on FPL. A good week indeed.
I was just going to say, I always remember my first season I did FPL when I actually didn't forget to put on a week was the year Leicester won the title. So I got all these Cup Leicester players for like £5 million, all these Cup Tottenham players as well that season. And my whole family who I was in the league with were just basically berating me at first, like, what are you doing to yourself? And then by the end of the season, I won by like 200, 300 points. So I guess it's a case of who's laughing now, really.
Yeah, I think fantasy football's great. The only thing that beats fantasy Premier League, I think, is like the tournaments. I really enjoy like the Euros and the World Cup because then you have the element of what you need to pick the players who don't get knocked out. And then you get into a whole new kind of different dimension of chess. And then when your team loses or the team you're hoping wins, you're then scuppered and you have to completely shift again. Josh, how are you doing?
Oh gosh, I am I on? I feel like I'm on
now.
now.
I think you're back.
Good, and I think we've got Ben as well. Right, sort of screwed intros because it's taken this long to get through the intros. So I feel like we might as well just crack on in with all the stuff, with all the stuff we've got to talk about. Oh my gosh! First stream back, and this is what happens. Right, let's talk the big game this week, and that's Liverpool Man United. A game that if someone told me this was the top of the table clash at the start of the season, I probably would have laughed at them. But fair play, that's how it's turned out. And I feel like there's no. I mean, naturally, the first person I must ask about this is Ben Parkinson, a United fan, who I don't think you predicted this going into that Christmas period and coming out as sort of at the top of the table, but United are there.
Yeah, no, completely unpredictable. I don't think anyone saw that happening, but I think it's credit to Ole Gunnar Solskjaer and Manchester United for coming through this difficult period at the start of the season to then get themselves to where they are. You know, you hear people ask the question, are they real title contenders? Are they actually title contenders? And yes, they are. Anyone who is top of the table.
All right, let's bring. Right, let's remove poor Ben. This is poor Ben. United are top of the table, and his screen his internet just goes, nah, out you go. So,
I
right.
just want to get to the time where I can ask him if he's Ollie out still. I don't
think we'll ever know. I don't think we'll ever know. I feel like it's like a soap opera storyline. It's a bit of a will he won't he kind of thing. Right. I'll ask the same question, but I'll turn to Cam this time. Liverpool United top of the table clash. It doesn't sound real, but here we are. United have kind of grinded out results and now are in a position where they could potentially go on to win the title.
I mean, firstly, not going to lie, this is I think the third, fourth, fifth time we've said this is the title deciding fixture this season, which, going on from something Luke was saying earlier, this is just the most unpredictable season ever. United have got there, not really by playing well. I mean, none of the teams really this season have played well, but they've got there just through simply the ability to grind out results. And that's the thing that always is a mark of a champion in a way. Not saying that United are going to be champions. I think far from it, even though they've been in a good run of form recently, I still wouldn't put them as favourites. But they've developed this ability now to play badly and come off in many games as the worst team, but still grind out those results. I think the Southampton game was a real turnaround for United because there was a lot of pressure on Ole Gunnar Solskjaer after, the last minute defeat to Arsenal earlier on in that month, that absolutely shambolic defending of the Demba Ba goal against Istanbul Başakşehir, which, me and Ben completely ripped to shreds a couple of months ago. That game when Cavani came on, completely turned it around and got United those 3 points. They've been on top ever since. And the thing is, it's not like, some of their players have been playing absolutely fantastically. De Gea's started to get back into form, which is vital for United. Marcus Rashford has been, I think, playing some of the best form he's shown in a long time. Bruno Fernandes has been consistent, scoring every penalty opportunity, scoring the many penalty opportunities that seem to befall Bruno Fernandes. And even Paul Pogba has started to come into a vein of form recently, which is only a good thing for United. Everything just, the troubles off the pitch that we've talked about many times with Man United haven't gone. This is a very good vein of form. Seeing what United did, of course, in 2020 in the previous season, and the fact they just stayed unbeaten from January, this isn't surprising. But it's just that the fact they're now grinding out results that's getting them into this position. They're getting there by not playing well. And that is a real mark of a team that if they can just start turning the style on, which, to be honest, is a thing for every team up there at the moment. The same, I would say, with Liverpool. I'd still say with Tottenham if they're in the race, Leicester, Man City. All of those teams aren't at their best vein of form at the moment, but they are grinding out results. United, I would say, a lot better than other teams recently. And I think it's a case of whoever can get into that vein of form is going to be champion at the end of the season. And if United can do that, seeing how they've been grinding out results when they've not been in form, I wouldn't put it past them, but they're not the team I think is most likely to do it.
Yeah, it's going to be it's an interesting one. It's going to be an interesting one to see if this is sort of I don't know, a string of a run of good games have got somehow, I guess because of the low point totals across the board. Maybe it's just a run of wins that have just put them elevated into that position, or whether this is a legitimate contendership. Because Luke, we've seen Spurs earlier this season were considered maybe their title contenders, and now they're in 6th place. They've had some results that haven't gone their way. Chelsea at one point, where at the start of the season looked like maybe this is the year that they kind of pushed for the title, and then have sort of fallen away, which we'll come on to in a bit later on, have fallen away. Does this United team have something that those other teams don't have? Or is it just because the way the fixtures are going, they seem to be just being on a run of good form?
I still don't think Manchester United are really credible as a title contending side. That doesn't mean that they're not currently in the title race, because of course they evidently are. I still think they lack balance. I don't think they have enough of the right pieces, enough kind of players that they need in order to kind of sustain this push. And I think one of the best examples of this was, I think it was a 3-1 victory over West Ham in December. And of course they came away as winners, but for long swathes of the game they were behind. They weren't particularly good in the first half, and then in the second half, away from home, they came roaring back. And we've seen that a lot from Manchester United, coming from behind, from losing positions to then win matches. And what I'll say is this: that's an important quality to have in the title race. And if you're doing that every so often, that's brilliant, because it shows that your players are resilient, it shows that the squad's together, and it shows essentially that the manager is able to turn these matches around. What concerns me slightly about Manchester United and the frequency in which they're doing this is basically that you can't do this a whole season. And that ultimately, for me, is why Manchester United probably won't end up winning the Premier League title. What I will do, though, and what I will say is, I'll caveat that by saying this: since the 9th of December, Liverpool, with exception to the 7-0 win over Crystal Palace, have really struggled to score. They drew 1-1 in the Champions League, 1-1 against Fulham, beat Tottenham 2-1, drew 1-1 against West Brom, 0-0 against Newcastle, and a 1-0 win over Southampton in the Premier League at the start of this month. Neither of these sides are at their very best. Of course, it's been a long time since Manchester United were challenging at the top of the Premier League. Liverpool, with exception of that 7-0 win over Crystal Palace that was just ridiculous on both accounts, aren't looking great either. And I think that makes this weekend's game so much more fascinating, because for the first time in a long time, both of these sides are first and second in the Premier League. And more importantly than that, I don't think anyone really knows how this one is going to go.
Yeah, it's a fascinating one. That who knows what the scoreline might be. And by the way, I should say there has been a couple of goals there. I know there are some Premier League games going on, and there have been a few goals in that. So we'll just get that score ticker up. Mikel Antonio has fired West Ham to a 1-0 lead over Burnley, which Luke, I'm sure, must be happy about. As well as Brighton taking the lead away at Leeds, which is an interesting one, given, I guess, Leeds' attacking style. Indeed, Luke. You've been sort of watching the West Ham Burnley game alongside this stream. Any first impressions of how that game's going at the moment?
What I would say is the goal was really nice from Antonio. It was just a crossover from the left-hand side from Pablo Fornals. Antonio has basically peeled off the two centre-backs and scored a tap-in at the far post. It was a great delivery and a really good piece of movement from Antonio. It's kind of what you'd expect from this kind of game. West Ham, at long last, are actually playing a slightly more progressive style of football. They're setting up slightly more progressively. And the thing that's really stood out to me with West Ham over the last month is just how good Craig Dawson and Angelo Ogbonna have been. And I've got to be honest, that's not something I expected to say, especially kind of after the first time that Craig Dawson was named in the starting lineup. They've been absolutely exceptional at centre-back. And so far, up against Chris Wood and whoever the other Burnley centre-forward is today, they've looked really resolute, really strong. And with kind of the likes of Souček, Declan Rice in front of them, it's looking like a nice West Ham team. And I think, I'm under no illusions that West Ham aren't going to be challenging for the Europa League. They certainly don't have that kind of legs, nor can I see this kind of run sustain itself through the end of the season. But if you ask me this, are West Ham going to finish in the top half? On current form, I'd say yes. I think they've got enough, and I think that will kind of play through towards the end of the year.
Yeah, absolutely. And apologies, I don't know what is going on. Something I have no idea. I'm not even in control of my own tech now, which is really this is like peak 2021. We'll bring on, and I know he's been waiting on the wings, Ben Parkinson. I think we've got you now. Hopefully, tech issues aside, you and I are in the same boat, so don't worry about it. But going back to United Liverpool, how excited are you as a United fan to now have top of the table clash against Liverpool, where there's a chance that, I don't know what you're expecting out of this trip to Anfield, but you could still be in a really good position for the second half of the season, and maybe, as Ferguson always talked about, and continue to knock Liverpool off their perch.
Yeah, no, exactly, 100%. I think no Man United fan expected to be in this position right now, and I think that's the thing. From every Man United fan I've spoken to, we're not getting carried away. I'm not convinced we are going to go on to win this league. However, it's putting a dent in Liverpool's ambitions. I see this game as bigger for Liverpool, if I'm honest. I think they are real really, really vulnerable at the moment, and I think Man United can definitely go there and take 3 points. But I still feel if Man United go there and win 3 points, I'm just not convinced they will still go on to win the league. Whereas if Liverpool take all 3 points there at Anfield tomorrow, I believe they will go and win the league. I think it's other teams like Man City who this could send a message out to if Man United win. I think that shows that Liverpool are there for the taking, and in that sense, I think it is a big game for Liverpool than it is Manchester United, especially with the 3-point cushion they have already. However, very excited to see the game. But, I know Liverpool are definitely vulnerable at the moment, but I still think that almost is irrelevant in the fact that, they're going to be up for this game. They will be just as prepared for this game as they were the Champions League final, as they were for most of their games last season, as they were for any game, because that's what matters. I think, take the context of the league positions away, and Man United versus Liverpool is still extremely competitive and will always be. They want the bragging rights, they want to knock their rivals off their perch, and I think that's why you're really looking forward to it. I think for Man United fans, the main thing is it's just nice to have a team that you can believe in, and you're starting to believe in the manager more. I know we'll probably talk about it later, but Pochettino to PSG, maybe a little bit of a blessing in disguise, just takes that distraction away, lets us all get behind Ole. Pogba's been performing really nicely, which we haven't seen for a while, so that's good. I think really positive vibes around Manchester United at the moment, which is really encouraging to see. But what a game it's going to be tomorrow, by far, I think, the game of the season so far.
Yeah, and while we have you, because I'm just aware, tech issues could happen, we might lose you again. So I did want to ask, with the United perspective, I mean, there's been a lot of talk about Paul Pogba. Has he turned his form around? Has he, made himself into a vital figure again for United? Given obviously he came with a big price tag, his wages are quite high. He is, with talent, one of the best midfielders in the world, and he hasn't performed and shown it on a regular basis, but he seems to have found it now. You've got Scott McTominay suddenly become a goal-scoring midfielder. Is that the area in which you feel like United have made big strides in recently, that sense of the midfield?
Yeah, I think definitely. I think it's the position we have. We're in depth.
And 1, 2.
Like I said, I think it's the position that they've got the most depth in. I think, Fred's been performing really well consistently for the last 2 seasons. Scott McTominay's been excellent this season. Obviously, Bruno Fernandes, Matic as well. There's a lot of competition for those places there. I think, it's been really interesting with Pogba. He's been playing further kind of out on the left, and I think, it's been working, but I don't see that as like a proper solution. I don't think Pogba's going to become a left midfielder really, and I think that's only maybe a tactic for certain games and where it's been working. So I think I'm still well aware. I think he probably will leave in the summer. It might be the right thing to do. I don't think Manchester United or the board should get distracted by this recent form on doing what is best for the club commercially and what is best for that dressing room. So I think that should not take into account this current form, but it's good to see that there's this current form because you want a competition for places. And I was actually quite happy to see Pogba on the bench because I think it's very easy for a manager just to be like, oh yeah, Paul Pogba straight in there, he's a star name. Whereas actually, if you measured his performances, Fred and McTominay were playing better at the time, so they got in ahead of him deservedly. But now he's playing better. He's in ahead of a few of them. So I think it's really good man management what Solskjaer's done there. He seems to be happier. He seems to be enjoying his football more. So I think, it's really positive. And I still believe, if Paul Pogba's happy, then the majority of the Manchester United.
Yes, fair enough. I think he just got his view in time before his internet cut out. But with Liverpool, I guess looking at Liverpool on the other hand, and I'll come to Cam on this. Obviously, things have not gone as well as planned. Draws against Southampton and a loss against Southampton and draw against West Brom weren't ideal results. Games you'd have thought they'd picked up wins. I know against you being a Portsmouth fan, I know Southampton beating Liverpool probably didn't give you much joy, but is this Liverpool team vulnerable at the moment, or because, and we know obviously we've talked about their defensive injuries that have given them headaches at the back. Are they vulnerable at the moment, or is this? Are you confident that they will be able to kind of turn this around and perform at their best on Sunday against United?
Well, firstly, as a Portsmouth fan, more depressingly, we've gone from being top of the table at Christmas to losing 5-1 against Peterborough in midweek. So a very sorry state of affairs in our traditionally bad month of January. But on the subject of Liverpool, I don't know what it is that's caused this run of form. Yes, there's been a lot of injuries, but at the point that Jose Mourinho made before the Tottenham game was that actually, yes, they have all these injuries, but it's still a strong Liverpool side. There's a lot of depth in that team. And as we've seen the likes of Fabinho, it's players that can play in many different positions. The whole point of that pressing game that Jurgen Klopp has is almost that players can play many different positions on the pitch and certainly just adjust to that style. So if you do get injuries, then players can adjust to different positions. They can adjust to the style, and it's a lot easier for them. And it's not like they've had a second string of players. And the youngsters that have come through, Curtis Jones has been fantastic, Neco Williams as well. So you can't blame the injuries for the form that Liverpool have got at the moment. To be honest, I just think Liverpool have tired out. I think, and it's not like they had any European games over the summer that caused their season to start late, but Liverpool have been sort of relentlessly, going into 2 Champions League finals in recent season, obviously the league last season as well, and advancing forward in cups. The side just looked tired, and I think it's just that, to be honest. I mean, Liverpool, I think with every team this season, no one's been properly in form. Teams have been constantly going out in and out of form, and Liverpool haven't been guilty of that as well. But they've just sort of got those results out. As we said, that 7-0 win against Crystal Palace, one of their most convincing displays, going into the results they had against the likes of West Brom, Newcastle, Southampton. I think particularly in the West Brom and the Newcastle games, there was really no excuse to not pick up 3 points there. And I don't think it's a case of not showing enough respect. I think it's almost, Sam Allardyce, definitely put up a very defensive lineup there. Liverpool just couldn't get the goals. So the problem, Liverpool, I think, are tired. It's impacting their creativity at the moment. I think, as Luke was saying, the simple problem that Liverpool have got is their defence is still strong, but they're not scoring the goals that they have done in previous seasons that allows them to kind of take games away from teams and then sort of ease up almost for the rest of the game. So, yeah, I think Liverpool's in not a bad situation, I think, as people maybe suggest they are. I think it's something they'll turn around. I still put them as favourites for the league just because they've always consistently been towards the top of the table. And even with this current bad run of form, I see them getting that creativity back. I see them getting back into form soon. But it's worrying for Liverpool. And if they don't get back into form soon, then perhaps you could question their status as favourites for the league this season.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I don't know what's happening. Oh, gosh. There we go. Is this working? Yeah, am I back on? I'm in a constant state of paranoia if this is working or not. Good. Okay, good. I'm in a constant state of paranoia now. But yeah, I mean, you make some good points. It's certainly not, Liverpool are certainly... I think they feel like definitely they've taken a few steps back. At least performance-wise, it feels like they've taken steps back, and they're not quite there, which makes this game a really fascinating one. Luke, I mean, Ben alludes to the midfield of United's. What's the key positional or individual matchup that you're looking forward to seeing on Sunday between the two teams?
The thing that I'm most interested in, to be honest, is how Liverpool's fullbacks do. There was a really interesting discussion on the Friday Football Social, which is one of BBC Radio 5's football podcasts. And Jermaine Genius and Mark Chapman were basically talking about how Trent Alexander-Arnold hasn't really been that good this year in comparison to his previous efforts. And when kind of I mentioned earlier the fact that Liverpool aren't scoring as many goals, I think that's a big part of the reason why. Previously, Alexander-Arnold was one of the most prolific creators in the league if you look at kind of expected assists and that kind of thing. And that's just not really happened as much this year. And I think the important thing to remember as well, if you look at the lineup from when Liverpool played West Brom at the start of this month, the back kind of the team was Alisson, Alexander-Arnold, Matip, Fabinho, Robertson, Curtis Jones, Jordan Henderson, Wijnaldum, Salah, Firmino, and Mane. That's not an 11 that Jurgen Klopp would ever kind of pick under his own steam. And I think that's a really important thing to remember. Liverpool are top of the league, or kind of first and second in the league, because they have been really good this year. They've been okay. And I think one of the things that I mentioned at the start of the season was the fact that this season as a whole, right at the very top of the Premier League, is going to be of a lesser quality than previously. Because kind of as Cam was saying, it wasn't plausible that Liverpool could sustain the levels that they've been playing at over the past couple of years. So to answer your questions, I think kind of the key thing from this matchup is whether or not Alexander-Arnold has a good game. If he is kind of playing at the level we know he can, creating lots and taking the risks that he normally does. And I think that's an important thing to remember too. This is a player who, when you look at some of kind of the analytics data, the number of times he loses the ball is among kind of the top percentile in the Premier League, because he makes so many risky passes, so many kind of aggressive passes in the final third. So for me, that is probably where this match hinges, and that's why I'm focusing on Alexander-Arnold.
Yeah, he has been I mean, not to say he's been questioned, because no one can question his talent and ability, but certainly his form of late has not been the greatest. And obviously when you look at the England setup, there's loads of talented right backs going around at the moment. So yeah, it's a game in which if he rebounds and plays strongly, I'm sure his confidence and people, the chatter around him will definitely, be a lot more positive than it is. Because there's a lot of topics. Obviously, we'll end the Liverpool United preview here with some predictions. I will say that I don't think this is going to be a high-scoring game. I do think it's going to be like a 1-0, and I'm going to give it to the hosts. I'll say 1-0 Liverpool. I just think it's going to be a quite scrappy game, really. Cam, any thoughts on the scoreline?
I am going to say 1-1. I don't think it's a game that either side's going to win. I just think they are very evenly matched in terms of not in terms of the form, but certainly the quality of the players. You take everything in. I don't think anyone's going to win this game. I imagine it will be Liverpool take the lead, United get a goal back in the last minute. From who it will be, I'm not exactly sure. I reckon probably Marcus Rashford or the Bruno Fernandes penalty, by that matter, or from Liverpool, one of the front three. But yeah, I agree. It's going to be a scrappy game. I don't think really there's going to be many chances from both sides. I think, sort of following on from what Luke was saying, I think that Alexander-Arnold and Robertson, I don't think they're going to be very prolific in this game. So I'm going to go 1-1. Luke, I don't know if you can be changed onto your screen right now.
I'm still here.
Yeah, are you still there? What it's going to be? I don't know if we can get the cam. I can't change it onto you, but the camera onto you, but I don't know. What's your prediction?
What I would say is, I agree with you essentially. I think it's 1-1 for me. The reason I say that is because I don't think either team is that good. I mean, they're good, don't get me wrong. They're kind of fighting at the top end of the Premier League, but they're not currently playing at a level where I think one team is going to run away with this. And as I've kind of mentioned previously, Manchester United have their issues of their own. And the other thing to remember is that Liverpool aren't scoring that many goals. So yeah, I do think it'll be 1-1 on this occasion. I think if I had to predict the goal scorers, I would probably go with Marcus Rashford for Manchester United. I mean, it's according to the FPL app, which is, of course, the public knowledge on these things, Martial 75% kind of chance of him playing. So I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on Rashford to kind of carry that Manchester United attack. I think Liverpool are the better team as a whole. Manchester United have better star players this year. So Bruno Fernandes, since arriving from Sporting Lisbon last season, has been the standout player in the Premier League. So for me, I think kind of the top-end talent at Manchester United is currently outperforming the top-end talent that Jurgen Klopp has at his disposal. But there's always a chance for Liverpool, and I think Liverpool have proven that they are so efficient. Jurgen Klopp is such an astute tactician, and yeah, I think this is going to end in a stalemate.
Yeah, it's not what the fans of either team. I think both fans would love a bit of a goal fest, but it does feel like it's going to be a scrappy-ish sort of game. So yeah, it'll be certainly one to watch. It'll be must-watch football on Sunday. So it'll be very exciting to see how that goes on, and let us know if you know what your predictions are for Liverpool United. If you know what kind of scoreline you think you'll see, you know, any you know, who do you think will score, etc., etc. Kind of just give us some of your thoughts in the comment section. So turning, I mean that aside, you look at the fixtures. I mean, in terms of, evenly peeled games, I guess Liverpool United was the big standout. There's obviously some other ones as well. Probably Leicester, Southampton, really, as well as Arsenal and Newcastle. It does feel sort of harsh to say about Arsenal, but Arsenal Newcastle feels like a sort of even peeled sort of game. Anyway, before we get into those, obviously still 1-0 in the other games: West Ham, Burnley, Leeds, Brighton. I just wanted to get your thoughts on what you guys feel like is the biggest sort of story, going around the Premier League at the moment about, besides about Liverpool United, is there a team or that has sort of, caught your attention for any reason at all? I'll ask Cam first on this one.
Well, that's a very difficult one, actually. In terms of the biggest story overall in the Premier League, I would say that's COVID-19 and all the Premier League trying to sort of clamp down on players sort of breaking the rules there, which has been something that's been quite disturbing, given that we are back in a national lockdown and there's all these sort of documented incidents of players breaking the rules, and the fact that elite football is lucky. I think it should count itself lucky to have this exemption to be able to continue, and it shouldn't chance it, because the government could very easily turn around to players who are breaking those rules and saying, well, if you're breaking the rules, we're not going to let you have your football. It's as simple as that. So there has to be a lot more responsibility. And I'm happy that the Premier League have come out in the last few days and clarified things such as celebrations, handshaking, just simple things. But I think that's the story. So in terms of the team at the moment, sort of one game I think we did mention that I like to quickly talk about, Fulham, Chelsea. Fulham have really come on a lot in the last month. I think Scott Parker has started to, I think the thing is, we know Fulham are still going to be relegation candidates and we're not expecting miracles from them. But the Fulham team, it started to, score a lot more goals, even without Mitrovic as well. But just the way they played against Liverpool last month, I think, was one of the best performances I've seen from this Fulham side since they came up. And I think really looking at the bottom of the table, I think Sheffield United are almost down and out. But I do think, obviously seeing the way West Brom played earlier, they could still stay up. And Fulham, I really do think Fulham have a chance to stay up. And looking at the way Chelsea are playing at the moment, I do think they're a very vulnerable side, Chelsea. And I wouldn't be surprised if Fulham win this game. It wouldn't be by a lot. I would say probably like a 2-1 or a 3-2. But the fact is, Fulham have their performances at the back are so much better than they were at the start of the season. I think Alphonse Areola, people forget this is a former number one at Paris Saint-Germain. This is a very good keeper who I think has really done a lot to marshal that defence. But going forward into midfield as well, and it's just starting to look like a more coherent team. And Scott Parker's really starting to get his style stamped down. And I think in terms of staying up, I really do think Fulham have a chance here, definitely. I guess same question to you, Luke. Any one big story, any one big team at the moment?
The team I was actually going to pick, I was also going to go for Fulham, and the reason I was going to talk about Fulham, kind of similar to you, was simply because
again, just waiting to see if my internet catches up with me and moves the screen. This is, oh gosh.
Anyway, the reason I was going to pick out Fulham was because Scott Parker has greatly surpassed expectations in terms of what people thought he would be as a manager. You had a lot of talk about Scott Parker just being kind of this PE teacher-like figure who was just going to stand there, kind of shout, talk about intensity, talk about winning all the 50-50 battles. And I think over the past month or so, he's really proven himself to be, number one, kind of a fine tactician, number two, very, very good at motivating his players. And I think the thing to remember about the Premier League standings at the minute, Manchester United, Manchester City, and Fulham are the only teams not to have lost a game in their last 5 fixtures. I will caveat that by saying that Fulham have drawn all 5, but the point still stands that they're very hard to beat. And that's a good quality to have for this Fulham side because, I mean, 2 years ago, they were absolutely abysmal defensively, and that's why they got relegated. So I think it's good to see them making strides. As we were both going to pick out the same team, I'll also throw this into the mix. It's not the Premier League, but I'll go there anyway. Is kind of Jordan Morris, who plays for the Seattle Sounders, is currently being linked with a loan move to the Championship. That's really interesting to me because he's probably a little bit too good for their MLS, and the Championship, a 6-month loan, would give him a good opportunity to kind of make his mark in Europe, play some games, and hopefully kind of push on from there. So yeah, I think there's lots of really interesting transfer business that's going down at the minute. And to link it back to the Premier League again, the other transfer that I've kind of been writing about over the past couple of days was Sebastian Haller leaving West Ham and going to Dutch champions Ajax. And I think that's an abysmal transfer on the part of West Ham, simply because the club signed him, they didn't really ever know how to use him, they then sold him at a £25 million loss. On the flip side, for Ajax, great business, because he's proven kind of when he was with FC Utrecht that he's great under Erik ten Hag, who's currently, of course, Ajax head coach. And he's already proven in his first 2 fixtures for the club that he's going to work in this system because there's people around him. And Mark Overmars, who is Ajax's director of football, I believe, kind of made the point that when Ajax signed Dusan Tadic, he'd only scored 3 goals in the Premier League, and that was because he was playing in midfield for Southampton. He then followed that sentence up by saying West Ham United aren't the most attacking of teams, and then went on to say basically, well, Haller's going to spend a lot of time closer to the opposition's goal, and he's going to be surrounded by teammates. So it's a huge opportunity for Haller because he didn't really prove his quality in the Premier League. He showed it in the Bundesliga. He's previously shown it in the Netherlands. So in terms of transfers that I'd pick out that have happened so far, I think that one is guaranteed to be a success because he was already kind of proven that he's good enough to play in the top flight in the Netherlands.
And oh goodness, great, I'm back, thank goodness. Well done, you guys. You guys have been brilliant throughout this. There's a lot to unpack. I mean, you guys picked out a lot of topics that I'm gonna just, forgive me, I'm just gonna break them down a bit one by one. You mentioned COVID, and certainly I think to date, I think we've had 9 games that have been postponed. Obviously, it doesn't feel like a lot because it's been the same teams that have had games postponed, be it Spurs, be it Villa. Chiefly, they have been the ones who have had to, had their games postponed. Just because we didn't hear your perspective on it, Luke, are you worried about, the duration of the season, and could it, kind of end in towards later in June or July and force some reshuffles? Or do you feel like, given the teams that have had postponed games are mainly not playing in Europe at the moment, do you feel like it can be resolved? The situation can be resolved with games then being rescheduled as they are right now, kind of ad hoc, as Fulham found out last week?
I think that's really interesting. And to answer your question about kind of can this season be finished in June or July, the answer to the question ultimately is an emphatic no. The opening game of the European Championships is meant to take place between Turkey and Italy on the 11th of June. And I think kind of going back to the decision from kind of UEFA to stage the European Championships firmly on that date was really, really naive, and just kind of prioritizing their competition over everything else when it was clear that this season was going to be difficult to resolve. So to answer your question, simply no, the season has to be done by that point. Otherwise, they'll be in a place where you'll get close to finishing the season. Players will then leave the European Championships, and then they'll come back afterwards and kind of play the remaining weeks of the season, which isn't a situation that anybody wants, because that could wreak havoc. I mean, to quote MLS again, you had an example where players flew around the world to play for the national team to kind of international qualifiers, and then had to be flown back on private jets so that they kind of missed some of the United States quarantine requirements so they could play in the MLS playoffs, which is the most important part of the season. So the coronavirus in football is a delicate subject. I think, to quote the foreign policy strategy of Barack Obama, football just needs to not do stupid stuff. And we've seen a lot of footballers doing stupid stuff. You had kind of the Tottenham players on Christmas Day with Manuel Lanzini, and even more stupidly, kind of the WSL allowing players to fly out to Dubai over Christmas, and then lo and behold, they test positive for the coronavirus upon their return. It's just silly things like that, where clubs don't have to do it. They could take the easier option, they could take the safe option, and there's been an air of complacency that's got into football. The other stumbling block, kind of if we look lower down the pyramid, is how non-league teams, kind of below National League North South level, so that's where Leamington play, how their season is resolved. Because last season, it was just declared null and void. So you had teams like kind of #United, to quote the well-known example, who were top of their league by some distance, would have probably been promoted, but just had the season wiped. I think Jersey Bulls, who play in the very, very lowest division, were unbeaten, had won every single game, and had been mathematically promoted, but were denied promotion because the season was cancelled. And there was a proposal that came out yesterday from kind of a number of figures in non-league that basically said, look, we need to decide what happens if the season is not going to be able to continue. And of course, these teams can't return until at least mid-February. In that instance, what we should do is kind of merge the results we've had this season, the results we had last season, and then points per game should be used to promote teams, but not relegate teams. So then you kind of sort out the issues in the non-league pyramid. I appreciate that was a really long answer, but I think the coronavirus situation in football is really interesting because a lot of the issues we face are self-made issues. Like, the Football Association didn't need to cancel the 2019-20 season. They could have just promoted teams that were going to go up anyway, but they cancelled it. And now we're in a place where you could see 2 seasons back-to-back cancelled, which is in nobody's interest, because teams, again, like #United, would be promoted, potentially would have been promoted twice and denied it as a result of the pandemic. They'll then be in the same league for a 3rd season in a row, still be too good for that league, and then you're denying other teams kind of the chance at promotion again. So yeah, I think the Football Association needs to get a handle on this. Kind of the WSL definitely needs to get a handle on this, and most importantly of all, the Premier League just needs to stop doing stupid things and get on with it.
Yeah, and I mean, in regards to your point to the WSL one, that one was a bit disappointing, I guess, given, you know, the push to kind of, you know, and to publicize that league as much as possible, and obviously the world's best women's footballers are in the country, and it's a shame that now that sort of negative press, I guess, came around that league. This is tough. It is tough. Cam, I don't know if you had any other point to weigh in on your COVID point that you made earlier, but it is a tough situation at the moment, isn't it?
Absolutely, and of course, let's not forget. Obviously, it's not just with the pandemic, but I think Luke made a point about what happens when the pandemic is over. That we have in vaccinations at the moment. We're hoping, or the optimism is that we can get back to some form of normal by the summer. And then when it comes into next season, we could potentially have, a potentially normal season, 21-22. But this COVID pandemic, and it's been one of the things people have been saying, you know, in non-league in particular, are so many teams, because of just the way the pandemic will have, you know, completely stopped their revenue streams coming in. in a way, with Premier League teams, obviously, yes, they've lost a lot of their ticket money, but they've got so many commercial deals aside from that, so many sponsorships, so much coming in from the players, that it's almost like, well, that's fine. Those teams are going to be able to survive almost. And yes, we have obviously seen some casualties, Wigan Athletic being the most notable, and they've put a lot on the pandemic. These teams are generally okay, particularly those in the Premier League. Whereas in non-league, most of these teams, rely upon their funds coming in from players coming in, sort of fans coming in to watch the games. A lot of these players is semi-pro. They do, a lot of jobs on the side of this. Football's just the sort of thing they do of a side, and they go into the FA Cup for, the dream like Marine had to be able to go and play a side like Tottenham Hotspur. This is going to be a problem that once the pandemic is over, there's a real risk that non-league football just gets completely decimated by the fact that these teams just can't sustain themselves anymore. And particularly when you see the end to a lot of the schemes and the financial support that the government have put in place in the last year, once that comes to an end, we could easily see a lot of these teams fold. And that is going to be absolutely heartbreaking, because one of the most essential points about English football is that you have a strong non-league structure that's really integrated into your communities. Where I grew up is, it was not just about Portsmouth or Southampton. It was about little non-league teams like Gosport Borough, Fareham Town, who did so much work, particularly with young people and bringing children up and training them and really identifying the talent that then would be passed on to the Portsmouth or to the Southampton academies. So it's not just, the fans in the communities that are going to lose out, but it's the next generation that are going to lose out because you don't have this strong non-league structure that will have just been decimated. So these leagues need support if we're going to have the next generation of footballers come through. And I don't know, again, whether that is something that can be done from the government post the pandemic, whether that is something that needs to come from the Premier League and the English Football League themselves. I think a lot of the top teams in English football, the top players in English football, particularly those who have grown up in their communities and been brought up and have strong links to these non-league sides, I think they would be distraught at losing loads of these sides and losing the real community spirit that they bring. So there has to be an effort to make sure that non-league football, not only, as Luke was pointing out, with just the situation where you can have, teams like #United, farcically not getting to justified promotions, but then the situation where non-league football just could collapse under its own lack of money. So something has to be done to support these teams and keep them going and keep the links not just with the community, but with young people as well.
Yeah, it is sort of a bleak situation, and it's very. I mean, you guys both nailed your points there. It's very hard, I guess, to. I don't know. There's no solution I feel like will please everyone, and so this is going to be a tough one for those who run football. I guess it's a tough one for them to ponder. And Lou, I know you wanted to make a point about the international tournaments as well, specifically the World Cup. Feel free to go and make that point.
Yeah, so just building on what Cam said about kind of future seasons, the 2021-22 season is going to be all kinds of mess at this point, because kind of in the December of 2022, the players are going to go away to Qatar and play in the World Cup. And that's a really awful situation for the clubs involved, because, of course, they're losing the players and the season is disjointed, and kind of we end up with the situation that I warned against could kind of happen with the Euros. And the other thing to bear in mind as well is that with the Qatar World Cup being in the winter, there is one small advantage. We know in advance that the football season is going to get a little bit messy in the future. So if the season gets a little bit messy now, we can then kind of build a 3-5 year strategy, play the way we have to get it back to normal. And then we're in a situation where the seasons kind of flow into one another. I don't think kind of FIFA, UEFA, or the kind of regional governing bodies need to have this kind of urgency to have things exactly the way they usually are, because, and I mean, we're all absolutely sick of hearing the word unprecedented, but these are unprecedented times in football, and things can be different. if it's a solution to get around an issue. And I think that's something to definitely think about going forwards, because the World Cup is going to be something that will be popping up on the radar very, very soon, especially considering that the Euros take place this summer and the World Cup next winter.
Yeah, it's a scheduling headache, honestly. This is really, and it'd be interesting to see what teams can, what can be done, because it's, and obviously different countries with regards to the World Cup, obviously different countries will have run things very differently. We obviously saw France decide to void their season last year to not. I mean, it attracted a lot of criticism once it then emerged that the Bundesliga were able to finish the season, Premier League, and so on. So, yeah, there's no easy answer to solve all this mess, and we'll see how we go. Fulham, Chelsea, I do want to talk about in just a bit, but I mean, yeah, talking about a trans. And by the way, we did have Ben, who his Wi-Fi has gone down, but there was his prediction for Liverpool United 2-2, which is. I mean, again, I wouldn't be surprised if that happened as well. It's one of those games where I don't really know what will happen, because both teams can attack and defend. So we'll see what happens there. But what was I going to say? Yeah, you talked about the transfer window so far in January before, and just a quick point on that. I mean, it's been a very quiet one. I mean, Sebastian Haller has probably been one of the biggest moves in the window, and that feels strange to say. Him, maybe Moussa Dembele in terms of internationally, but in terms of English transfers, yeah, it's probably Haller's move. But I mean, this isn't really a surprise, is it, Cam? That teams obviously in this COVID pandemic are obviously very mindful of what spending money on players would look like, how it'd be perceived in the public, and also and looking at the wider football pyramid. Obviously, teams have to use their money elsewhere in terms of wages and making sure the operations of their club are fully running. So it does sort of make sense that transfers aren't really a priority for teams at the moment.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. I think for a lot of teams, they are. I think firstly, in terms of stopping travel, if you have transfers, you have to get players to travel between their current club and their new club. They have to have medicals done. Obviously, a lot more of this you can do online. A lot of the contracts you can sort out online, but you can't do a medical online. The player has to move. You've then got to go through quarantining procedures. It's all just going to get really messy, especially as football doesn't use the biosecure bubbling system that we've seen in cricket, we've seen in Formula One, we're seeing in tennis at the moment. I think, as you said as well, with where its finances are concerned, I think there would be a lot of criticism on teams doing big money transfers at the moment, financial strain to society more generally. And I think there was a push at the start of the pandemic that we know, and it even came, directly from Matt Hancock, for football clubs to step up, footballers, for example, to take a pay cut. And then obviously, one of the biggest things we saw was obviously Marcus Rashford come forward in the summer, not in response to that, but obviously on the child poverty issue. And I think there's a lot more, coming from the clubs at the moment to be doing more work, sort of philanthropy, charity work like that. And that's what's getting the clubs a good press, rather than the transfers, which would, I think, just completely undermine a lot of the sort of solidarity that I think football clubs are trying to show with communities at the moment. I think just one thing aside, though, with the transfer market is I think we could see a lot of Bosman transfers coming through over the summer, pre-transfer agreements being decided. And I think the biggest one is going to be Lionel Messi, because he seems to be wanting to get out of Barcelona more and more as each day progresses. We know there was the whole strife with his contract last season. I think if the season in Spain finishes more at a normal time, and there's no indication that they're going to suspend the league in Spain, so you'd imagine it finishes in mid-May, then I believe it's June the 10th he's got to take up that option on his contract. And so by that point, if Lionel Messi goes, there's two clubs looking out for him at the moment. Paris Saint-Germain to play under Mauricio Pochettino, to play with Neymar as well, which would be a real big pull for Messi, and Manchester City as well. Obviously, Pep Guardiola, the man, I think, that really helped propel Messi into the player that he is today. And it was rumoured that City would be the destination where Messi would go if he left last summer. So I think that's going to be the big story in this. And of course, under Bosman rules, that would be a free transfer. And the only thing the clubs would have to take on is the wages. So, yeah, I don't think clubs are going to be going out for big money transfers. It's going to be these pre-contract agreements. It's going to be players with very little time left on their contract, either getting them to sign a contract or having these pre-contract agreements. We've just seen Mesut Ozil. We expect to be released from his contract from Arsenal, going off to Fenerbahce. It's those kind of deals that we're going to see this window.
Yeah, it does. It just certainly looks that way. And Luke, I'll ask you to weigh in. And you know, it does feel like you said, it'll be either pre-contract agreements or loans with options to buy or obligation to buy or something along those lines. We've seen it, obviously, Dele Alli. The talk is that if he does go to PSG, it's likely a loan move. And the Moussa Dembele deal I referenced from Lyon to Atletico, that's a loan with an option to buy. And Luke, I don't know, you mentioned Jordan Morris. I don't know if that's I know it's a loan. I don't know if it's an option to buy, or I'm sure maybe, you know, somewhere in that contract there may be a clause placed in there for Swansea to exercise as well. But it does feel like that is where the market is going at the moment. And with the exception of Ajax, who were able to spend for Haller, and that might be the only exception that comes to mind, other of Leipzig being able to get Szoboszlai from Salzburg as well. But that's a deal between two sister clubs, I guess. But with the exception of those, and Jovic to Frankfurt as well comes to mind, it does feel like Cam's point about either pre-contract agreements, free transfers, or loans with, you know, giving the club an option to buy as well. It does feel like those will be the two preferred methods of movement for the foreseeable future, at least.
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree. And I think kind of it suits West Ham perfectly, because that's all David Golden and Sullivan like to do in the transfer market anyway. On a more serious note, I think the interesting thing about there being potentially more Bosman signings is because it gives so much more power to the players. And this is something we've seen kind of gradually over a number of years. And the thing to remember about kind of free transfer signings is that if a player runs down their contract and moves to another club at the end of it for free, they tend to get a higher signing on fee kind of compared to what they ordinarily would do, because more of that money would go to the previous club that they owned if it was a transfer fee involved. So it suits the player better because they get more money when they join, and it also suits the buying club better because they spend less money overall. So yeah, I think this is going to be something we see a lot over the next couple of years, because there are a number of high-profile players who are kind of starting to run down their contracts and look to move on in that way, look to take more control over kind of their image, their profile, and the trajectory of their careers. And I think one of the interesting things about that was a couple of months ago, you had Zlatan Ibrahimovic attempting to sue Electronic Arts over kind of his image rights in FIFA. And so we're going to see more of that, and we're going to see players kind of being creative about how they structure kind of the new contracts and how they structure them into the future. I think one of the interesting kind of things about this window as well is we are still seeing some activity. Like, again, I'm going to hark on about MLS again. Mark McKenzie going to kind of the Belgian league as an example. There's been a number of players that have left MLS and come to Europe this summer. So the thing to remember, I think, at the moment is that if there's value in the market, teams will make the transaction. So like Brendan Aronson leaving Philadelphia Union and going to Red Bull Salzburg, I think that's a great deal. If there's value, the transfer will happen. If it's a case of saying, well, we could wait another season, the player will still be there, and then we'll make the move once the fans are back in the stadium, once the income's coming back in, I think that's probably going to be the option. And again, a lot of this is about the discourse as well, kind of the idea that clubs are having to kind of strap down and kind of make people redundant. It's absolutely abysmal PR to do some of that stuff and then go out and sign a player for £40 million like Arsenal did in the summer. And I think clubs are starting to learn from that. And the final thing I'd say is Cam is absolutely right about players kind of moving cross borders. And we're seeing that in lots of sports. Like, to give a hockey example, Toronto are currently holding 3 goalkeepers and are trying not to waive the third one kind of later in the season so that then no one else can take him, because he'd have to quarantine if he crossed the Canadian border. So we're seeing a lot of really random, wacky stuff that we wouldn't usually see in terms of kind of player transactions. And I think it makes it slightly more interesting. And I think it also makes us focus on the things that are actually important, kind of how these players are playing, how they're performing for their teams, rather than just thinking about who are Manchester United going to be linked with this window. Because as interesting that is, it can get a little bit sour after a while, because then you just have endless rumours and endless speculation. I think outside of Haller, I think the Ozil transfer will be really interesting to see how he gets on in Turkey, because that is just a world away from how he's been treated at Arsenal compared to how he'll be treated at a club like Fenerbahce, who he's spoken about kind of dreaming to play for a number of years now.
Yeah, it's like you guys said, I think it's an interesting time for transfers and, you know, clubs. And I feel like Cam, you're going to make this point that I'm just about to say, but I do feel like when clubs scout players, and you talk about the McKenzie move, that's obviously, and Aronson, obviously, the age profile obviously is a big factor in this, because clubs see there's potential, and, you know, they're more, I guess clubs will be more willing to make moves for players who have perceived potential. And already, I think it was Sam Allardyce who said he couldn't make a few moves for some players because of the regulations that Brexit's kind of created for players. I feel like now there's a bit more of a qualifying criteria, I guess, for them to get a work permit, and so already it's starting to that changes are so starting to take place as well. So yeah, it's gonna be interesting. Cam, I know you want to make a quick point about youth players. Go ahead.
Well, yeah, I mean, we've just seen it this season. I mean, Liverpool is the obvious example of this, where clubs have had the pandemic, where they've had injuries as well coming in with them. What we've seen at more higher frequency, and with what Luke was kind of saying about, well, you don't want to bring players between borders, and the clubs are going to try and hold on to players simply to stop them having to do all this quarantining. Youth players, I think this is the best opportunity that youth have ever had, not just coming up from the youth academies, but I think there'll be a lot more Premier League sides looking to young players, even maybe more established players in the Championship, maybe as far down as League One, and seeing this potentially being like, look, we need to bring these players into our teams and really develop them, because for too long now we've seen young players coming from the lower leagues up to some of the top clubs in England and just see them fall by the wayside. The most obvious example to me, Nick Powell. I mean, Nick Powell was a fantastic player a youth player when he was at Crewe. He went off to Man United and just did nothing. He got loaned out a few times. You know, that tends to be these things that these big clubs just go out and they just buy young players and then loan them out again and never really take the effort to integrate them in. I think Dele Alli was, the one real exception to that in the last few years, where Tottenham clearly saw the potential he had playing in League One. Pochettino saw him fitting his style, and he became one of the most important players at Tottenham under Pochettino. And again, this season we've seen it at Liverpool. Liverpool haven't loaned out Curtis Jones, Neco Williams, Reece Williams. Klopp has put them into the starting 11, and, you know, they have performed fantastically. Curtis Jones, you know, is in some eyes justifying himself as a potential starter in the future. And this is a real opportunity for youth players to not only for themselves to be stood up and counted, but for big clubs in the Premier League to stand up and count them. Bring these players up from the Championship, bring these players up from League One, and really give them that challenge that's going to push them on, but ultimately see them rise to their potential. And if that is a change in the culture of football clubs that really is solidified out of this pandemic, then ultimately the biggest winner from this is going to be the health of English football as a whole and the England national team. And if that means we perform better on the world stage, we may, you know, go on and win a major tournament, I think we can put it to this potentially new culture that we could have with the way that we use young players and bring them up to the top clubs in England.
Yeah, there's an interesting point, and, you know, maybe we'll talk about Arsenal in a bit, but Emil Smith-Rowe is another name who's certainly benefited from not having to go out on loan, and is now getting some opportunities. And it equally could work either way, because obviously I think now the regulations are that Premier League clubs can't sign anyone under 18. I think that's the ruling at the moment. And obviously, you know, we've seen a lot of 16-year-olds go to the Bundesliga and find varying degrees of success over there as well. Dortmund have signed a few from City. So it'll be interesting to see what, I mean, there's a lot more. It'll be interesting to see what, I guess, English players do now, I guess, given these new circumstances, what they kind of decide to do. Just a side note, Luke, were you gutted that Ozil hasn't opted to go for DC United in the end?
I wasn't, to be honest. I think Ozil wouldn't have been a good fit for DC because DC aren't very good. DC needs someone who's gonna put themselves about. Basically, DC don't need a number 10. Ozil is a fantastic player, but he's not what DC United need. So, kind of, if you ask me the question, would I like to see Mesut Ozil play for LAFC? I would have bitten your hand off, but no, I think it would have kind of put the league and the player in bad light because it just would have been a match made in hell, essentially.
Yeah. I mean, it was interesting that they were in the race. Obviously, they made some. I think it was a lot of offers with regards to his personal brand as well, which was a very interesting. I don't know. I guess it's a very interesting off the book sort of non-wage sort of incentive, I guess. But it looks like, as you guys have said, it looks like he is heading back to Turkey, and I'm sure that's not the way he would have wanted it to end his Arsenal tenure, but that's sort of how it's sort of petered out. All right, you guys did both mention Fulham, so I feel like we should return to that. And Fulham, Chelsea, and I mean, there's a narrative on both ends, really. I mean, with both managers in particular, and I guess you guys have both talked about Fulham and how. I mean, just to kind of go off your points again, just touch upon briefly. Do either of you, and I'll ask Cam first. Do you feel like Fulham have enough to stay up if they keep producing performances like this, or is it too late? A bit like, I don't want to say Sheffield United are dead and buried just yet as well, but certainly they have a bigger mountain to climb than Fulham. And arguably both teams have about the same amount of resources. So do you feel like Fulham have enough to stay up, Cam?
Out of all the teams in the bottom three, yes. Ultimately, they do. They've been in fantastic form recently, and I think that just stands in very good set. I mean, West Brom have started to. They played well against the big teams. Obviously, had that good win against Wolves today. But the thing, as we were saying earlier, Fulham, they're unbeaten in 5 and it's 5 draws, but they're getting points, and every point in a relegation battle counts. And yeah, I think they have enough to stay up. If I was Graham Potter at Brighton at the moment, I would be looking really nervously because yes, they're playing well against Leeds today, but they just haven't looked convincing at all. And they look far more like a side that's going to get relegated than Fulham do at the moment. And I think the difference between Fulham this season and Fulham a couple of years ago when they were in the Premier League, they're defensively a lot more solid. As a team, they just look more like they've been able to adjust and cope with the demands of the Premier League. So, yes, I do think Fulham have enough to stay up this season if they can continue in the vein of form they are at the moment.
Yeah, Luke, I'll ask you the same thing. But yeah, Cam, you alluded to some of the teams who are sort of looking over their shoulder. Obviously, Brighton at the moment are still holding on to that 1-0 lead against Leeds, which would be a big result for them, you would feel like, in terms of the context of where their season's going at the moment. Newcastle have been poor, to put it bluntly, of late. And certainly, Steve Bruce is under a bit of pressure at the moment. Obviously, Burnley are there as well. It's interesting. They're about to be taken over by an American consortium. So you wonder whether that will translate into on-pitch success or not. And then again, as you said, the 3 teams in the bottom 3 at the moment, Fulham, West Brom, Sheffield United. So yeah, Luke, I mean, with all that going around, do Fulham have what it takes to kind of stay up if they keep producing performances like they have of late?
I think Fulham are going down. Just because if you compare them to the teams around them, I think Brighton are weird because I think they actually have some decent players and I think they've got a good manager, but they seem to just underwhelm consistently. I think Burnley, currently 17th on 16 points, probably have enough to survive just because they're always in that mentality. I think the only way Burnley go down for me is if Sean Dyche was to leave the club because kind of there's talk that the people behind the investment, I think they're called ALK Investments, aren't actually planning to invest much money into the first team squad. So that could be a problem for him because he wasn't happy in the summer anyway. And I just compare them kind of to the teams around them. And I think unless Newcastle have an absolutely catastrophic end to the season, which is completely possible, I think it's very hard to see how Fulham finish above Burnley, Brighton, kind of Newcastle teams like that. I think Fulham will come close. I don't think Fulham are completely out of this. I think, however, if you compare them to a Burnley, if Burnley are playing against Fulham, I'm probably going to pick Burnley for the win, or at least Burnley to get the point they need. And I think that's the difference. I think they've just got that little bit more savvy than kind of Fulham do. And that's not to criticise Fulham, because I don't think Fulham would have been expecting to be any kind of different position. I think even if Fulham do go down, if they stick with Scott Parker, they'll be in a good position anyway. And we've seen this a lot with teams like Norwich, where Norwich kind of yo-yo between the teams, but each time they come back up, they get better. And I think Fulham have learnt from the mistakes that they've made in the past, where they spent way too much money on players, brought in way too many players, and it kind of wrecked their season. And I think now they're taking a little bit more of a collective approach, a little bit more of a slow approach. And I think in the long run, that will pay off. In the short term, they might go down. But this is a club that is kind of heavily investing in their stadium, seemingly investing kind of personally in Scott Parker. And I think this is a team that over the next couple of years, even if they do go down, will be back and then kind of on a better footing to fight for survival once again.
Yeah, it promises to be a very close relegation battle. And as you said, Fulham seems to have the infrastructure to be able to cope with relegation. I mean, you see on the ticker, West Brom beat Wolves earlier this afternoon, which is a result I would not have predicted, especially with Sam Johnston picking up COVID. They're arguably their star performer. So who knows if just quickly, just a quick answer from both of you, is if West Brom somehow manage to stay up, which I don't think will happen, but if they do, does this go down as one of Sam Allardyce's big achievements? Because we haven't actually, since our last stream, he was subsequently hired, and it does feel like this would be a huge kind of feather in his managerial cap for him. So yeah, Cam, just quickly, do you think if West Brom somehow stay up, does that go down as one of Sam Allardyce's biggest achievements in his career?
I think so. I mean, his previous one was Sunderland. That Sunderland would have been his greatest escape, just because of the fact he had a group of players that, they were Premier League quality players, but they were in no way looking a team whatsoever. And they had performed frankly disastrously in their first few games that season. And the way he just harnessed that team and, produced some fantastic performances that season, that was the best from Allardyce. But this is an even worse group of players who aren't even Premier League quality at all, in my opinion. Apart from like Sam Johnston, Kieran Gibbs isn't the player he was 4 or 5 years ago. Many of these players, Dejan Garner is a player with a lot of future potential, but it's not. It's by far a worse team than that Sunderland team that he kept up 4 or 5 years ago. So if he can keep West Brom up, this is his greatest escape. That I would say so, definitely.
Yeah, Luke, any thoughts on what this will do for, I guess, how this will be perceived in Allardyce's long managerial career?
I think in terms of where it ranks, if they were to stay up in terms of great escapes, I think it'll be up there. I personally think that kind of the job that he would have done at Sunderland would have been better, because that club was just so toxic and so disastrous for so long, and he still turned it around, still kept them up. And even though he left, kind of before he did leave for the England job, people were quite positive about Sunderland, and I don't think people have been positive about Sunderland since, nor had they been kind of a long time before that. So the job he did there was frankly amazing. In terms kind of, if you assess the whole body of his work, I don't think he did a particularly great job at West Ham. To give you kind of an example, West Ham should have walked life in the Championship. The squad they had was so much better than everyone else, and they scraped up via the playoffs. So in terms of better or worse than West Ham, definitely better. And then you get to kind of vintage Sam Allardyce, where he had teams like Bolton playing some really great football, teams like Blackburn, who were great under Sam Allardyce until he was sacked. So I don't think this would be his greatest achievement, but it definitely kind of comes close to what he would have done at Sunderland a couple of years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those who are watching, do let us know what you think about all the issues we've talked about, by the way, be it COVID, transfers, and the relegation battle going on at the moment. Just quickly looking at flipping on the other side of this game, Fulham-Chelsea. Chelsea have been in a bit of a rut of late, and it's a bit of they're in that now sort of position where their club heroes in Lampard returned to be manager and is now I mean, he's got, I think, one of the lowest win percentages or one of the lowest win points per game stats of most Chelsea managers in the Abramovich era, probably the worst, I think. They're now in a position where, you know, they may have to get rid of their legend, their hero as manager. It's a bit of a tricky one. Obviously, the reports that the likes of Avram Grant might be lined up on a short-term interim basis for the likes of a Thomas Tuchel or a Julian Nagelsmann or a Max Allegri to kind of then step in the summer. Cam, what are your thoughts on Chelsea at the moment? Are you worried would you be worried for Lampard, or would you be confident that he could turn things around at the moment?
I think the thing with Chelsea at this moment in time is that the Lampard signing as manager seemed to kind of sort of discuss or pre-dawn a new era of the Abramovich era, which had always been about almost like a boom and bust. You bring these managers in, they have an immediate impact on the squad, they start winning trophies, and as soon as they have a season where they don't win anything, you get rid of them. And, you know, some of the biggest names in football in managers have been at Chelsea and had that boom and bust. Mourinho twice, Ancelotti. You know, these are top quality managers. And the Lampard signing as manager was completely different to that. I mean, this was an even bigger risk than Andre Villas-Boas, for example, because at least Villas-Boas had a title under him in Portugal, whereas Lampard had only done a season at Derby in the Championship. But I think what Abramovich wanted was, I think there was almost a sense of a longer term plan. Having had this transfer ban in place, that Lampard was the person who wanted to bring the youth players in and build this long term project that could put Chelsea at the top of the Premier League, not just by buying in loads of players like they tend to do in the past, but utilise their youth academy properly for once. And you've got the likes of Mason Mount, Reece James, Fiyako Tomori, who have all come through in the last couple of seasons and have played fantastically and justified themselves, you know, being close. I mean, certainly in the case of Mason Mount and Reece James, you know, justified themselves as players in the starting 11, and Tomori, someone very much knocking on the door for it. So in that sense, I think Lampard has achieved. But ultimately, I think Abramovich has to work out, does he want this long-term project, except he's not going to get trophies for a bit of time? Because Chelsea, you know, mucks up their greatest chance to get a trophy last season. I don't think they're going to get that chance again this season. I really struggle to see how they're getting top four, maybe even any European football next season, the way they're playing it at the moment. So Chelsea need to work out, are they in this for the long haul, or are we going to go back to this boom and bust? Because if you look at the investment that Chelsea made over the summer in signing Timo Werner, Kai Havertz, Hakim Ziyech, these quality players were very much the sort of signings that Chelsea would have made, you know, under the Ancelottis, the Mourinhos, the Contes, these big managers with big reputations and ultimately high expectations that they would deliver on and then get sacked when they don't. And I feel if Lampard can't deliver with these players coming in, then ultimately I feel we're going to go back to that boom and bust, because ultimately by signing those players, I think Abramovich made a statement of intent that he was expecting, you know, big prizes, and he had the confidence in Lampard to do that. I think just quickly on the point about Avram Grant, I think Avram Grant, as someone who's managed at Portsmouth as well, I've known the impact that he had on the club when we were in very dark times financially. And even though we were almost, you know, down to go down, he just brought a real good spirit to Portsmouth Football Club and really pulled the players through that time and got us ultimately to an FA Cup final. Of course, he managed at Chelsea as well. Let's not forget that, where he led them from the rut that was happening at the start of the season under Mourinho, where the dressing room just weren't getting behind him at all. And it was just loads of infighting at Chelsea. Got them to a Champions League final and second in the league. And of course, that wasn't good enough for Abramovich. But Avram Grant is someone that I think, to see the season out, I think definitely in the same way Gus Hiddink always used to be the perennial caretaker manager for Chelsea. In terms of if Lampard, I mean, I'm assuming here Lampard gets sacked. I feel if that's going to happen just because of the signings that he made and the intent that Abramovich was showing. Long term, I think Tuchel would be a good appointment. He's someone who has a lot of tactical nous. He's someone who can bring through younger players as well. And I think he's someone who I think would be a good fit at Chelsea. I think Allegri, again, I mean, obviously Allegri had a lot of success at Juventus and again did bring through some young players, but I'm not sure if he's as good a fit as I can see Tuchel very much fitting in very well at Chelsea. I'm not as sure with Allegri.
Can people hear me again? Because I've been kicked out of the stream again, and I just want to make sure this is working. Okay, very good. I'm glad. What was great about it was seamlessly behind the scenes. I got kicked out by StreamYard and brought back in, so I'm glad that happened behind the scenes. But yeah, you do make some good points, Cam, about, and it is a question that I then posed to Luke, I guess, is this because this dialogue around Lampard's future, I don't think will go away, and maybe because it's a cultural thing, because we're all sort of in tuned with the Chelsea culture of win as many things as you can, and then when it starts to go off the boil, make that change, and then try and recapture that winning feeling again. Is it because of this culture? I guess are we right? Does this culture need to change for Lampard's future to be a long-term one? Because again, this dialogue is not going to go away, or are there genuine concerns about, because of Lampard was sort of, he had that 1 year of management, and I don't really want to compare him to his managerial peers of his age. But obviously, Gerrard's had a few years at Rangers. Rooney has just got started at Derby. Well, who knows when how long he'll be there for? Is it kind of a combination of both, really, between culture and Lampard's inexperience that is sort of hindering him at his future? Sort of causing this dialogue about his future at the moment.
I personally don't believe Frank Lampard is a very good manager, and I don't think he should have got the job in the first place. Before I go into that, what I will say, I'll warn you about Avram Grant, because I watched what he did to West Ham and it wasn't good. However, back to Frank Lampard. The reason I don't think Frank Lampard's a very good coach is because Chelsea this summer, of course, signed Timo Werner and kind of other players as well, Timo Werner and Kai Havertz being the two that I wanted to speak about. Both of them were exceptional in the Bundesliga last year, as you'll know, Josh. And the important thing to think here is that both of these players have really clear playing styles. They're very good at certain things, and they made a name for themselves for being good at those things in Germany. They come to Chelsea, big money transfers. Havertz was 70 million. And they're just not being used in the right way. And I could cut Lampard slack if he was getting bad performances out of his players, even though he was using them in the right spaces. But the number of times where we've seen Kai Havertz just playing in the part of the pitch where he isn't comfortable, where we've seen Timo Werner in places where he isn't comfortable, where we see Chelsea not making the most of these players. Both of these guys are exceptionally good at pressing and playing in a high-octane team that likes to get the ball forward from back to front quickly and likes to press kind of at a high intensity. Chelsea aren't good at any of those things. And that leads me to think two things. Number one, Frank Lampard potentially bought these players without really understanding how they play. Or number two, which could potentially be worse in terms of kind of his prospects at staying at the club, he wasn't that involved in the decision-making process from the get-go. If Lampard didn't have that much of a say over the signing of Havertz, who came in for £70 million, that doesn't say much about Roman Abramovich's confidence in him, because that's a huge outlay for the club, especially during the pandemic. And Lampard doesn't really seem to know how to use him. And that's what would concern me if I was a Chelsea fan. I'd look at this and say, well, why aren't these players delivering what we expect of them? And I think Frank Lampard, for all the good things he's done at Chelsea, has a lot of issues in terms of kind of applying the players in the right spaces and coming up with a tactic that suits everyone. I'm not sure really what Chelsea's identity is, and it certainly doesn't match up to the players that have been trying to buy and trying to kind of recruit of late. I think there's a disconnect at Stamford Bridge, and normally that means that kind of the hierarchy has lost trust in the manager. And I think kind of when that happens at Chelsea, there's only one way that tends to end.
You're right. Yeah. And I mean, we've put our Twitter accounts again, not to plug my own Twitter, but there is an article I've liked recently from DW Sport. I think it was Matt Ford who wrote about why do Bundesliga imports maybe don't hit the ground running with the Premier League, and to a wider point that includes Haller, that includes Havertz, Werner, those types of players, Joel Linton, you could put in that category as well. But yeah, it's when you can't get the most out of your two kind of big signings, there are sort of, there is an alarm bell ringing, and especially, you're right to kind of question, I guess, Chelsea's transfer policy, because obviously, I'm comparing it to Liverpool because that's a team I follow, but I know very well, Michael Edwards, sure, is in charge of most of transfers, but Klopp has input, and you wonder, how, again, with this sort of sporting director manager approach, maybe it's more 70-30 in favor of Marina, I can't pronounce her last name, Gravaskina or something like that, in favor of her at Chelsea. Maybe it's not as quite as even keeled as other clubs, but it's a tough one, no doubt. And do we think, I mean, it's obviously there's a lot of teams that are sort of stumbling at the moment in terms of Chelsea and Spurs, and teams like Leicester and Everton threatening to kind of get maybe break through into that top four. Do we feel like Chelsea are a lot, and ask Cam, because most of us had Chelsea pegged as the third best team in the league before the season started. That was sort of where we thought they were. Do we have them pegged for the top four automatics now, Cam, as a team that automatically we expect them to make the Champions League next season?
I think we pegged Chelsea into the position we did. I think partly because we thought that the players would come good. Lampard had a master plan of how to put them in, and yes, it would take time, but they would ultimately find that style. And it seemed up till the start of December that they were getting that style. I mean, admittedly, they weren't scoring goals. It was very much more a defensive style, keeping the clean sheets and just getting those 1 or 2 goals to win the games as necessary, which wasn't the style I think many of us predicted, but they were still doing it. And so in that regards, I don't think anyone raised anything until they come into this vein of form that they are, or bad form that they're in at the moment. And I think people are really starting to question now a point that, again, I think we've all said it. Lampard, we don't know what his identity is. There's nothing really that we can distinguish about him. And you can do that with a lot of the other teams fighting for top four at the moment. You know what you're going to get when you face Tottenham, but they do it so effectively. You know what you're going to get with, Everton, for example. Everton is a side that very much does rely on, Dominic Calvert-Lewin scoring the goals, a very, strong and as stable back four as they can. But you're going to get that against Ancelotti. So with Leicester as well, it's a team that relies upon counter-attacking. Jamie Vardy, going forward, making those runs and ultimately scoring the goals, but a really strong midfield coming out from Tielemans and Ndidi as well, really supplying going forward, and the interactions between the fullbacks, as part of that real counter-attacking style. Chelsea, I can't tell you what they are as a team. And so I think partly for that reason that they've sort of fallen into this bad run of form at the moment, I don't think they are going to make top four. I don't even know if they're going to make European football next season. I mean, looking at the League Cup final, that's two teams I would say top four at the moment. I mean, Liverpool, definitely. United, I think, will get there. City, Tottenham will probably be my pick for fourth. Behind that, I mean, Leicester fifth, Everton sixth, playing a lot better than Chelsea at the moment. I mean, if Chelsea could get there, but if they finish seventh or lower, and a side like Aston Villa wins a cup, for example, and given the vein of form they're in, I mean, it's plausible. Or Arsenal could easily put all their efforts into the FA Cup, try and win that. I mean, I don't see Chelsea making top six at the moment, if I'm being honest. And that's just the situation they're in at the moment. And I feel that it's, unless they win a cup, they're not going to make Europe next season. And yeah, this isn't good. But I just can't see them beating that Liverpool, City, United, Tottenham top four. And I don't see them beating Leicester and Everton. And, frankly, for Abramovich, given the players that he's signed and the investment he's put into the club, that would just be a complete disaster. And there's no other way of saying it. Luke, I don't know if you've got anything else to add there. Hopefully
Yeah,
we'll be able to get the camera onto you at some point.
I kind of agree with you, to be honest. I think Chelsea are in a difficult situation in terms of the position in the standings. Now they're 10th after 17 matches. They've won 7, drawn 5, lost 5, scored 32, and conceded 21. So that puts them on 26 points. And I think the really interesting thing to note about this is that there's only 10 points between Chelsea in 10th and Manchester United, who are top of the table. There's so much still up for grabs in this season, and it can all change so quickly indeed. And I think, kind of to your point about the likes of Leicester and Everton and Southampton and teams like that, Chelsea have the quality to kind of burst through the table. And it only takes a couple of bad results and a couple of good results to see your kind of position in the table completely change. I mean, there was a time when Manchester United were right down the bottom and people were talking about whether or not they should sack Solskjaer. And again, same with Arsenal. Arsenal were right down the bottom. Now they're only 2 points behind Chelsea and not that far away from the European places either. So Chelsea, it can change so quickly. The teams ahead of them, a lot of them aren't as good as Chelsea. Chelsea, man for man, definitely should be in the top 4. If you look at the transfer spend, 100% of course they should be in the top 4. Whether or not it happens, it would concern me if Lampard is still the manager at the end of the season. I think the final thing I'll say on Chelsea for now is that they're playing RB Leipzig in the Champions League last 16, and they will be absolutely licking their lips at that proposition, because this is a team that has kind of plucked 2 of the best players from the Bundesliga, playing against a team from the Bundesliga, of course, previously the home of Timo Werner, and they're in great form, and they look like they know what they're doing, and Chelsea are disjointed and not getting the best out of their players. So this is a true opportunity for Leipzig to kind of progress again to the later rounds of the Champions League. And if Chelsea are eliminated, that kind of dampens the whole season, because you've spent big, you've not made progress kind of in Europe relative to what happened last year. And then again, the league position is up in the air too. So kind of final word on Chelsea, that their record against the top 6 so far has been frankly abysmal. That needs to change. And if it doesn't change, then yeah, they won't make Europe, and perhaps it'll be a very, very cold end to the season for Frank Lampard indeed.
Interesting. Is Josh back? Yeah.
I don't think so.
No.
So,
shall we? I just had one other team that has kind of gone under the radar, and I know Josh mentioned this is something we could talk about. Manchester City have very much under the radar. They're playing Crystal Palace this weekend, and the thing that's kind of really, I know, Josh, if you wanted to kind of take over from what we were just talking, Man City, obviously going from Chelsea in the side, we were saying Man City have kind of just sort of crept their way through the table in recent weeks, and kind of through being completely not really spectacular in the way from obviously Pep Guardiola hasn't got them ticking in the way they have, but they're still in a position where many people think that, you know, they're certs to make top 4. A lot of people still saying they can win the title. I mean, yeah, I find it really interesting, because we've seen the sort of the fits and starts that a lot of teams like Tottenham, Chelsea, Everton have had. But City had a difficult run at the start of the season, and they've just kind of been really consistently sort of unspectacular since. And I'm almost thinking now that, you know, we're making all these talks about teams going into the top 4, and City have kind of just gone under everyone's radar, but could still very feasibly win the title. I mean, I don't know what you would think to that. I mean, where are Man City in all of this?
I think Man City are right up there, and I kind of, in some respects, disagree with the idea that they've kind of crept up on people, because the way the fixtures have fallen this year, like City were always going to be behind because their season started later, had a couple of postponements, I believe, and now kind of they've still got a game in hand at the top of the table. And if they win their game in hand, and I can't tell you who that game is against, but if they do win it, and of course City can beat anyone in this division, it would put them only a point behind Manchester United at the top of the table. Look at their last 5 results; they've won 4 and drawn 1. So this is a team of course, they're kind of player for player, very, very good indeed, and they've still got players to come back into the mix. Like Sergio Aguero hasn't really played this year, and if Pep Guardiola can get him fit, that changes the dynamic again. because what we've seen recently with kind of De Bruyne playing as this false nine is that isn't City at their best. And this season, and I think this cuts across a lot of the teams in the league, we've not seen Liverpool at their best. We've certainly not seen Chelsea at their best. We've not seen Tottenham at their best. We've not seen Manchester City at their best. And ultimately, that's why this is so close. Because if City were at their best, they would have probably won 99% of their games. If Liverpool were at their best, again, the same, they would have won that many games. And it's quite refreshing to see, kind of from a fan's perspective this year, how close it is at the top of the table, because everyone is showing that they are weak in some area. And I think City, the reason why they're much more competitive this year in terms of the title race is simply because they've sorted the defence out. And I think if you look at the components that make up that defence, Cancelo has been playing really well recently. John Stones is just revitalised, and he looks like the player he was always meant to be. And Diaz, who they brought in from Benfica, I believe, this summer, again, he's looking like a great purchase, and one of the few players brought for a big price tag this summer who has kind of hit the ground running in the Premier League. City are definitely in this title race. I wouldn't be surprised if they won the title, and I think it would vindicate a lot of the things that kind of Guardiola has been saying about his side and saying about the project that they've got going on there. A question I'll put to you, Cam, as it feels like we're two-wheeling this at this point, is kind of the City group have been buying out loads of clubs around the world. They've got kind of Girona in Spain. They've recently bought a team kind of in Bolivia as well. What do you think of teams and like kind of organisations that pick up teams in different countries and then use it to kind of develop players? And do you think that's going to be important kind of post-Brexit with kind of, especially with new transfer rules in the UK as well?
Well, I think it's certainly for a lot here in the UK. I think it's going to be very beneficial, as you said, with Brexit. I think building up those links internationally. I mean, clearly the City group, there's a very clear hierarchy as to which club is at the top of that. And I think particularly as well, not just with Brexit, but with the pandemic as well, I think there's going to be more of an emphasis now on, okay, we're not just going to get the best players in the world necessarily, because it's not, from a PR side of things, it's not always going to be the best thing for the fans. So let's build up these things like clubs with Girona in Spain. Obviously, there's the link. I think it's with Melbourne City in Australia and New York City in the MLS. So, yeah, I mean, this whole thing about satellite clubs, effectively, I'd see them, it's always been a very interesting one, because Man City, I think, are obviously one very prominent example. And we haven't really seen the effects of it, simply because the players that they have signed in the past haven't really come from that. I mean, the only thing they've really shared is the resources. The one thing that's, I think, been the most prominent example of that for me is obviously Red Bull. And Red Bull, I mean, obviously their whole business model in sport is very much more about promoting their drinks business as much as it is about the sport. But you know, there's a real hierarchy. And I mean, you touched upon it earlier, the amount of players that have come recently from New York Red Bulls over to Salzburg and then to RB Leipzig. There's this clear structure emerging there. And I don't know if the City group may start looking at that and go, this is something we're going to have to do for the benefit of our club. Because if you look at some of those players, I mean, Szoboszlai, I think is the most obvious example, I hope I pronounced that right, of a player who has really developed at Salzburg under the fantastic coaching of Jesse Marsch. I know you've mentioned him previously. And then, he's now slotting himself into that Leipzig team. And really, Leipzig have come on fits and bounds simply because, yes, they've sold on a lot of the players that they've had, but they've brought in through the chain as well. So I don't know if the City group will want to take more of that. I don't know if any other club in England will want to do that. I think English football is a lot more particular to community than it is these kind of structures. So I don't know if there'll be any other club to do that. I mean, I don't know what you think as regards to that.
I kind of think the group model is interesting. It's difficult as well, because I don't know how you would feel if you was the junior club in this relationship. I think it's different for teams like, kind of, to use the New York Red Bull model, for example. That's different because they can't be relegated. They're always going to be kind of top of the pile. Josh, we can see you. And that's great for New York Red Bulls. But if you're a team kind of playing in the league that has promotion relegation and you're one of Manchester City's kind of sister clubs and you're not getting the right kind of investment, I think that's going to hurt teams like that. reason I mentioned it is kind of they've bought out so many clubs now. I think that it's done kind of 10 or 11 teams around the world. And it just creates a really interesting dynamic in terms of where Manchester City can recruit from and how that kind of works its way through. And there is kind of a lower key example of this. Kind of Sheffield United have a team kind of owned by the same people over in, I think it's Belgium, who play in the second tier. And I think it was either in the Athletic or 442, I read this. They're kind of playing around with shirt manufacturers. So like they're manufacturing their own kits. They're kind of obviously using the people who produce the kits, making their own kits, and then it's just specific to that club. And they're thinking about using it at Sheffield United too. And I think stuff like that's really interesting in terms of like trialing new ways to kind of run football clubs. But I think at that point, speaking of running football clubs, over to you, Josh.
You two are legends. You guys can guest host, co-host anytime. I'm now hotspotting on my phone. That's how bad the Wi-Fi's got in my where I am at the moment. I'm now hotspotting in. But I mean, fascinating. I caught some of that conversation. Really interesting stuff, obviously, because Man City recently, I think they announced their 10th club in their network, but from Bolivia, I think has now joined the network of the City Football Group. And so, I mean, yeah, so that, I mean, really fascinating to see how that model sort of works. And I think you guys, I'm sort of guessing what you guys are talking about, but I'm going to guess that, you know, like the Red Bull network, I think clearly is perceived now as sort of the best sort of network of clubs, I guess. I still feel City have some issues. Like they have a deal with Melbourne City in Australia, but they've had some issues with players being stuck at Man City. They've been too good for Melbourne City, but not good enough for Manchester City. And so they've just been stuck at Manchester City on the kind of reserves. So it's something I think the City Football Group still needs to work through, but certainly the Red Bull group has it all figured out. So I'm guessing, I guess, you know, yes, Aaron Moy is another chief example of that as well as Luke Bratton as well. And yes, Jack Harrison. Yeah, exactly. Who I think has been unable to help Leeds get that win at Brighton. I'll be honest. And indeed, that game has finished 1-0 to Brighton. And I know, Luke, you were watching the West Ham Burnley game. Just quick thoughts on that game, because that has also ended 1-0 with no change other than from Antonio's first half goal.
Yeah, it's a great result for West Ham, and I think it's kind of an entirely predictable result. West Ham are kind of the team.
Can anyone hear me? This is an issue again.
I can hear you, Josh. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you perfectly.
Awesome. I'll carry on. Great performance from West Ham, and I think kind of the thing to remember about this as well is that we're very pragmatic, West Ham, at the moment. David Moyes, by hook or by crook, has got the team in a place where they're getting the results, and I don't think West Ham fans can really complain at this point because it's looking good. West Ham are looking good. People like Mikel Antonio are firing, and I think that's a good example as well. The thing that does worry me about West Ham slightly is just simply the fact that squad depth is an issue. Like West Ham have sold Grady Diangana, Robert Snodgrass, Sebastian Haller, and that is going to have an impact if the club don't bring in some new signings rather imminently. But yeah, today, great result for West Ham. And again, I think it's kind of the 4th consecutive clean sheet for Craig Dawson and Angelo O'Connor. That's ridiculous. And you love to see it, honestly.
I can tell the shock in your voice as you're saying it.
Well, the thing is as well with Craig Dawson it was a really weird signing in the first place. He's on loan from Watford. And this is a guy who I think is kind of either late 20s, early 30s. So when he joined on loan, everyone was kind of a bit confused, like kind of what's going on here. And then we didn't see him for months and months and months. He wasn't even in the matchday squad. And then kind of mid-December, he gets thrown in and he just played really well. And since then, him and Ogbonna have been really fantastic. And what I would say about West Ham, kind of people like Declan Rice, Thomas Souček, kind of Vladimir Kufau as well, have got a lot of praise this year, and deservedly so. But Angelo Ogbonna is now 32 years old, and he's playing some of the best football of his career. And when you contrast that with kind of how West Ham were playing previously, especially last year, is a world away. And to think that Ogbonna and Craig Dawson are currently keeping out Issa Diop, who was linked with a £50 million transfer to Tottenham or Manchester United last year, keeping him out of the team, keeping Fabian Balbuena out of the team, who is kind of a Paraguay international as well. That's a huge kind of thing for Dawson and Ogbonna. I think it's great to see because they're showing that they've still got it and they're showing that they can still add value to this West Ham team. And ultimately, they're proving that West Ham do have depth in defence. The only issue now going forwards is whether or not West Ham has sufficient depth in attack. My concern is Mikel Antonio, the lovable rogue that he is often injured. And if he gets injured, that's a huge issue. It will be a situation where David Moyes might throw Mark Noble up front again, which would be a somewhat traumatic experience. I hope it doesn't come to that. But who knows? I mean, Mark Noble as a false nine, anything could happen. But, it's a great result for West Ham. And, I mean, it keeps them in the top half. And that's all you can really ask for at this point in time under David Moyes. Cam, what do you make of West Ham this season?
I mean, again, I don't really think I can add much to what you've said. I mean, the thing is, there's the players that seem to be scoring the goals and getting the results. As you kind of said, they're not these attacking players you'd expect. It is very much the likes of Souček, Fornals, who are very more sort of centre mids, almost CDMs as such. I think the thing with David Moyes is that they are playing a slightly more aggressive style of football from like to build from the back. He's not the most exciting manager to watch, but he does get results. And I think the thing with David Moyes is I just think his reputation has kind of been trashed because of, the frank disaster that was his spell at Sunderland. I don't think anyone really had any optimism when he came back to West Ham. And so I think he's showing, or he's justifying, actually, look, this side can go out and get the results that they need to. I mean, of course, the lack of quality up front, Antonio is good, but he's not that sort of world-class centre-forward that West Ham need to make that next step. And I do think West Ham, they've always had a squad that I think is there or thereabouts in the fight for Europe, but they've just always underperformed. If they can get a proper strike partnership working up front, whether that's buying that world-class striker or getting someone that can really link up well with some of the talent they do have, like Mikel Antonio, who I think is more of a competent winger, I would say, than he is a centre forward, then that's the way West Ham, I think, could really build on their potential. But yeah, it's just been an encouraging season for West Ham, absolutely. I think Josh has dropped off. So whilst I'm here, I'm just going to take us down to League One very quickly, just to say that Portsmouth Football Club have won 1-0 against Fleetwood Town. And after losing 5-1, it is exactly the sort of antidote that we need. I mean, lower league football it's a complete mess at the moment. I mean, League One, in terms of coronavirus, has been the one that's just been most affected. And you've got us, we played, I think, one game less than most teams, but then a lot of teams have had, I think every team in League One has had games called off because of coronavirus. And obviously, this isn't a league where a lot of people will be going off to the Euros in the summer. So the EFL could easily extend it. But I mean, imagine if this was the Premier League and you had, players needing to go off to the Euros in the summer and you had all these games to finish. I mean, it is just a mess. But yeah, Portsmouth Football Club just need to go up this season. We've literally been in the playoffs now twice and lost in the semi-finals in games we should very easily have been able to win. And if we don't go up, if we're just stuck in League One, I mean, there'll be no better present for the fans who have suffered a pretty awful 2010s, going into administration twice, nearly losing the club and being in debt for over half of it. I think there'd be no better present for the fans than to start next season off in the Championship, where, we don't expect to go up to the Premier League, but we certainly think we can fight. So, encouraging performance, just especially after losing 5-1. I think you'll appreciate a 1-0 win. Definitely, in that sort of instance. I'm not sure if Josh is still here or not, but I guess, I don't know if there's anything else in the Premier League to talk about, perhaps, or if Josh is leading on that. Are you there, Josh?
I hope I am. Am I
Oh,
there?
we can hear you. We can hear you.
Can you hear me? I mean,
Yeah, we can hear you.
I'm on delay. I feel like I'm on delay. Good. Okay, because I feel like I'm on delay. This has been. I apologize to you both. This has been a car crash. I mean, welcome back to term 2, 2021, I guess. So. I mean, yeah, I feel like we've run through all the Premier League talking points. I don't know if you guys had any other ones to cover, or wanted to cover at least, before we wrap this up. Other than, I guess, the last thing I did want to talk about was, and unfortunately, we didn't get Ben's perspective on it, because I know he wanted this guy at his club, but Poch to PSG was sort of the big managerial change. And it, I mean, again, it's very, I mean, you know, he wanted Poch at Man United. It would have been good to have him on and see if he felt like this then situation sort of worked out for all parties involved. But just quickly, and we sort of alluded to it, Messi and the impact Pochettino's presence could have. Do we feel like this was the right move and will be a great move for the Parisians to have the Argentine in charge? I'll start with Cam.
Well, I think whoever they have in charge, they have the quality of players that they should be running away with that league. I mean, they are. I mean, no offense to Ligue 1, but given how far PSG are ahead in terms of the infrastructure, the players they have there, it is just a farmers' league in comparison. And so, PSG should be miles ahead, whoever the manager is, and they haven't been on that form. I think it's a thing of every league in Europe in general this season that no club has gone on and dominated. And actually, those who have been towards the top in recent seasons have struggled. But, you know, in most cases, Bayern stuck by Hansi Flick because, you know, obviously it's Hansi Flick. He's, you know, what he did with them last season when he took over in the run of form that they came on. You're not going to turn away from that just because of one bit of bad form. The same could be said with Real Madrid as well. You know, Real Madrid haven't started the season great, but they're now in second behind Atletico. There will be no way they're going to get rid of Zidane. With Pochettino, with PSG, I think Tuchel kind of felt like he was coming towards a natural end. I mean, I don't know if Luke agrees with me on that, but I must feel after losing the Champions League final, Tuchel felt like he'd reached the end, and they needed that new manager to come in and kind of give them something new. And Pochettino certainly does. I mean, the one thing Pochettino did very well at Tottenham was build a squad in his image. He built particularly the young players, which I think will be an interesting step from PSG's sort of recent policy of buying the best talent. But there is young talent that can be developed. But yeah, the Messi one I think is a big implication because I don't think there would have been any chance of Messi going to PSG if Tuchel was in charge. Whereas I think there is now with because clearly not only do you have Neymar as well, but you have Pochettino coming in, an Argentine, and we know Messi has said he wants to play for an Argentine coach. If Mbappe goes to Real Madrid, clearly the funds will be there to do Messi's expensive wages. So the chance goes up. I still think he's more likely to go to Man City. I've said before, the squad for Messi, perhaps more than Pochettino, who, of course, doesn't, until I think about a week ago, didn't have a trophy in his managerial career. So, yeah, I think the last thing to say, this is a big move for Pochettino because the one thing he didn't deliver at Tottenham was a trophy. He's now got the opportunity to deliver a trophy, but I think the thing that PSG desire more than anything else, also similarly to Manchester City, is the Champions League right now, because that's really, I'd say, the only thing where they're in a proper fight for. I don't know if Josh is still here or if Luke just wants to pick up.
Yeah, I'll pick up for you. What I would say about PSG, I think Tuchel's time at the club had clearly reached its end point. Kind of, if you reference the Champions League final, I think that's a great point. But even if you look at kind of the results through kind of the end of November and into December, a 3-2 loss against Monaco, a 2-2 draw against Bordeaux, a 3-1 loss against Manchester United. It's just not great. It's not really where PSG should be, especially considering kind of the strength of their competition in the league and in domestic competitions. I think the important thing to remember about this situation, though, is that PSG are still in a great position to challenge for the title this season. They're currently second place, 19 games, 12 wins, 3 draws, and 4 defeats. They're on 39 points, which is just 1 behind Lyon. That's not a bad place to be, and especially after just sacking a manager. So I think Pochettino will be very, very disappointed indeed if he doesn't win the title with PSG this season. He should do, and I think that would do him a world of wonders, because it would get kind of that label off of him that he kind of is this coach who doesn't win anything. So that's important, and I think that's a positive step for both club and manager. In terms of the links to players like Sergio Ramos, Aguero, Lionel Messi, PSG need to be careful, because if they want to win the Champions League, which ultimately has to be the aim, because they've already won everything there is to win in France under kind of their Qatari ownership, then the Champions League is obviously the target. However, if you then kind of bring in all of these veteran players, all of these kind of aging players, you get to a point where your squad isn't that competitive kind of game to game, and you get through on quality alone. And I think sometimes you definitely need kind of that physical edge to get there. So the caution sign for me is that PSG shouldn't get carried away in terms of these Bosman signings, because they could very easily go out and spend the money, spend kind of the wages on Aguero on a free transfer, Messi on a free transfer, and Sergio Ramos on a free transfer. I definitely don't think they should. And I think that's ultimately kind of the most important thing to remember about this. But yeah, it's a good appointment from PSG, and I look forward to seeing how they do.
Yeah, and you know, I think they have won sort of the Community Shield equivalent, I think, in France already under Pochettino. So I think he has sort of delivered that. I mean, in fairness, Cam, it's not a huge trophy by any means, but he has got one. And it'll be, it feels very, I mean, we talked about transfers, how they're probably going to be smaller scale and loans and whatever. So it is very hard to then fathom big wagers for Messi and co changing clubs and whatever, Mbappe to Real Madrid and whatever merry-go-round that will sort of inspire. But it should be, I mean, it'll be very interesting to see if any of his former Tottenham stars join him, be it a Christian Eriksen or a Dele Alli or I don't know whoever else wants to reunite with him in Paris. But I think we're going to end this here. It's been an entertaining stream, I'm sure, for those who just enjoy chaos, because we've certainly provided it. Not as much chaos at the back as with Wolves' defense earlier today, but I want to immensely thank both Cam Horn and Luke James for sort of co-hosting this stream as while I've sort of battled tech. You guys rock. You guys have been phenomenal. We'll be hopefully back on Wednesday. Hopefully, I don't really know anymore. And if not, hopefully next Saturday, tech issue free, fingers crossed, knock on wood, all that kind of stuff. So we will see you then, and enjoy the rest of the week. We have Premier League football every day till next Saturday, so enjoy it.
I feel